Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host a clubhouse every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and this week, along with Rabbi Adam Mintz and Rabbi Raphael Davidovich, we discuss compromises and differences of opinion relating to the biblical borders of the Promised Land and the modern state of Israel. We see how these discussions might actually be the only way out of the current conflict. So throw away your maps and pull out your sacred texts, and let's discuss the compromised land. But sure enough, this week we have a new episode in asking Moses for an exception to the rule. This week, the Jewish people, after 40 years wandering in the desert, have finally come to the border. They've actually already conquered some land outside of the land of Israel just to get passageway. They're about to cross over the Jordan River. And two tribes, the Reubenites and the Gadites, approach Moses. And the Bible starts by saying they owned a lot of cattle. And they noted that the lands on the west side, the west bank of the Jordan River, were really good for cattle. And they said, would it be okay if we stayed here? Moses, seems to be the standard, falls on his face and says to them, does that mean that you're questioning the whole endeavor here, that you're not going to come and take the promised land? And he even talks and reminds them that a whole generation, their parents, had also come close to the border, had sent the spies over, and then had their second thoughts and doubts, and decided, again, not to engage in this endeavor of gaining the promised land. And he says the Lord was incensed at Israel, and for 40 years he made them wander in the wilderness. And he says, and now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers to add still further to the Lord's wrath against Israel. So again, he's shocked by their question. The way they phrase their question is kind of interesting too, because they say that what they want to do, they come back and they say, what we want to do is we will build places for cattle to graze, and we will go ahead and build places for our families to abode, and then we're actually going to come with you and help you conquer the land. And until the project of fulfilling the promise of the promised land is fulfilled, we will not go back to our settlement here on the West Bank. But until that time, we will fight along with you. And at this point, Moses comes back and he talks not so much to God, but I think to the other leaders and to Aaron and the priests. And he says, if you will commit to do exactly that, then I will permit you to stay on the west bank of the Jordan River. And it really goes on in terms of each of the different steps. That, I think, is the last time. I might be wrong next week, but I think it's the last time that the people of Israel, or a segment from the people of Israel, asked for an exception. And Moses came back and gave them the exception. So, Rabbi, in your opinion, what makes this story worth a whole chapter in the Torah? And what are the lessons and what are the takeaways?
Okay, first of all, this is an amazing story. It's about exceptions, but ultimately, in the end, it's about what commitment to the land of Israel means. Because what we have is we have the two tribes of Reuben and Gad, and basically they're willing to say, we're willing to put ourselves on the line to be able to live where we want to live. Now, they didn't necessarily have to offer that, but they decided to offer that. And it shows what their commitment to the land is about. And I think that's a very important, the whole Torah we've read about they're always complaining about going into the land of Israel. Why'd you take us out of Egypt? We should have stayed in the land of Egypt, and all of these things, right? The Meraglim, the spies come and they say bad things about Israel. And now you have a group of people who are willing to say, we're putting ourselves on the line to be part of Israel, to fight the battles before anybody else comes, before anybody else settles down. We're going to fight with everybody. I think that's a wonderful lesson.
So it's interesting that you kind of see in the members of these two tribes someone who was virtuous, their intentions were good, and you would put them in the same category as the daughters of Tzlofchad or Jethro. They were good and well-intentioned, and in fact,
that's a good term. They were well-intentioned.
Well-intentioned, and in a sense selfless, because what they were saying is they will fight for the rest of the nation to redeem the promised land, and then they would go back to their houses. But I sense in the commentators that there's actually a bias in the other direction. In other words, Rashi picks up on the fact that when they said, we will build sheepfolds for our cattle, and then they say, and we will go ahead and build homes for our children, Rashi said, that they actually were materialists, that they showed their colors in terms of caring more about grazing rights and prosperity. And I think, in a sense, the way they're introduced also kind of places them as someone whose intentions, in fact, were very materialistic. So how do you square that with your circle?
Good. I mean, there is no question that Rashi is critical of them, or Rashi says that they're interested in their self-interest, right? Where is it going to be better for us? I'm really taking a different view. Rashi decides that these tribes are no good. Rashi doesn't like people who break with the norm. Rashi thinks that everybody should do the same thing. I don't think that that's the way that we're necessarily trained. I think that we're trained that it's okay to be a little different, and that if you're willing to make a commitment, that it's okay to be different. So so I understand Rashi, but I'm not a traditionalist as Rashi in the same way, in terms of the fact that everybody needs to do the same thing.
Well, I think that's wonderful. That's why you and I are made for each other.
There we go, Mike. That's right.
So let's talk in terms of, in biblical terms, it would be called the Promised Land. And in modern day terms, it would be called Zionism. In a sense, the Reubenites, the Gadites, were the first Jews to live in the Galut, so to speak. In other words, they were saying, you can go into the land. We want to live outside of the land. I think historically, the fact that they lived there ultimately became part of Greater Israel. But in that moment, in any case, they were acting very similar to Jews like you and I who live in New York, who said, we are going to do everything we can to support you in the building the dream of Zion and the land of Israel. But we're actually going to live on the other side of the river, so to speak. Is this the first instance? And it's funny, it happened even before they took the land. They already had these outliers.
Yeah, well, by definition, it's the first example, because they're just taking possession of the land, and they're outliers. I think the Torah is really making a comment about how they feel about these outliers. Now, Rashi has one view, and I presented another view. Obviously, there are different views about these outliers, but clearly, this is the story of the outlier. It's different than the daughters of Tzlofchad. The daughters of Tzlofchad are making sure that they get an equal portion. That's not about being an outlier. That's about protecting their own interest. It's really a different story than the daughters of Tzlachad.
Well, absolutely. Do you give any import to the fact, again, I've already mentioned that the Bible seems to go out of the way to say that they owned cattle and that they were suitable, they were looking for land suitable for cattle. Do you think that this is part of a tension throughout the Bible that we haven't discussed before between agriculture and cattle raising, between vegetarianism, if you will, and a culture of raising cattle, of the wanderer, the grazer, and the landholder who prays for the rain, who tithes the crops? There are so many laws of Judaism that have to do with agriculture in a very positive sense that it almost becomes the paradigm. And cattle grazing and certainly of slaughtering animals was almost put into the temple. I don't believe that it was even permissible to eat meat outside of the temple culture. Is there any of that going on here?
There might be. They're clearly making an argument for the fact we need more land because that's the way that's our livelihood, and our livelihood needs more land. Now you wonder, I think, Geoffrey, this is an interesting question. What did the other tribes think about the request of Reuben and Gad? The Torah never tells us, but it's left open for our imagination. What do you think the Torah thought?
You know, it makes it seem as though it was the key issue that Moses had was, number one, are you going to be included in the draft? Are you going to help the rest of the people? If we let you pursue your own private interests and your different lifestyle, are you going to still be committed to the national movement? That was one thing. The other argument that Moses makes, which I find even more fascinating, is he harkens back to when the spies came back. And he harkens back at great length because he says, you're going to be doing the same thing. You're going to be taking away the idealism. We all were looking forward to going into the land until the spies punctured that bubble. And here you are at this precipitous moment where we're going into the land, and already you're taking away from the whole, from Klal Yisrael, if you will. But he doesn't really put any words into the mouths of the leaders of the other tribes or to the priests. So I don't know how to answer that, but I do find it fascinating where his concerns were.
That's interesting. You say he doesn't put words into their mouths. You wonder about why the leaders of the other tribes, when it came to the spies, they weren't so quiet. All of a sudden here, they're quiet. And you wonder why that is.
Well, I mean, again, we only can read what's in the text, and we can't read in between the lines. There are two words that kind of are interesting to me. One is that they talk about, okay, so after you fulfill your obligation, you will come back here, and it'll be an achuzah. It'll be a holding for you. And the other word is we're crossing the Jordan. The word Ivri, Hebrew, comes from the word la'avor, to go over. And certainly one of the references or associations that we always have is that we crossed over the Jordan, or in the case of Abraham, of the Tigris. But the point is we were coming home. and the cattle grazers are still wanderers. So there's also that tension between coming home and ending the wanderings in the desert or of the diaspora. And then there is the other side of it is, well, we've gotten used to this life and we like this untethered existence. And then there's this sense of what is the land to them anyway? Is it something that are we just passing through? What does achuzah actually mean?
So that's a very good question. What is the attitude of these people towards the land? These two tribes, what's their attitude? What about the other tribes? Do they have a different attitude towards the land? Does everybody recognize the holiness of land? I think from the story in the Torah, it's very hard to.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end it says, that this land will be to you achuzah, a holding in front of God. I'm reminded that actually, does the land really belong to any of us? And that it doesn't talk about achuzah le'olam, forever. So it does raise these questions about, there's so much talk about coming into the promised land. What does that even mean? Is it our land to live on? Or is it something that we own? I don't think we'll ever know, but I know that these issues are there, even if we just look at the simple words. This conflict between a wandering people and a people that comes home.
Maybe we should open it up, Geoffrey, and see whether we have some opinions. Michael, anyone else who wants to share their view? We kind of threw out a lot of ideas today so far.
Absolutely. So if there's anyone who would want to comment on what we've been talking about in terms of the first time that the Jewish people came to the land, and the first time that the kind of borders were started to be made, both physical borders and borders between lifestyles. Raphael, welcome.
Thank you. Fascinating conversations. I don't want to take up too much time because I have to go myself, but I'd like to just make 2 points. And if I run out of time after the first one, I'll stop there. The first thing I just want to point out, I wasn't able to look at the screen to see who said this, but someone mentioned that Rashi objected to the tribe of Reuben and Gad for their request, but that's not necessarily the case. That's not necessarily the voice of the Torah itself. And I just wanted to make a sort of a point, not so much in defense of Rashi, but more in defense of the point that Rashi makes. To me, it seems fairly clear from the narrative, not only of Reuben and Gad, but meaning the long arc narrative that you see at the end of the book of Joshua, that what Reuben and Gad's request, while it was honored, was not considered appropriate. And you see this in 2 ways. One way is that the fact that they were on the other side of the Jordan led to their being separated from the Jewish people or the Israelite people at a much earlier stage. There's a medrash that makes the point that they were exiled even before the remainder of the 10 tribes. And also that they had distanced themselves, and they almost started a civil war later on at the end of the book of Joshua for wanting to build an altar, which led to a big misunderstanding there. But sometimes, while a Jew might feel he wants a little bit of distance from other Jews, it's ultimately not really a good thing. And I think that's why Moshe never apologizes for his initial rant. It's not as if Reuben and Gad say, no, listen, we'll help as soldiers. And Moshe says, I apologize for the misunderstanding. The point is left unresolved. And it seems to me that the narrative voice of the Torah feels that all things being equal, what they did was not considered appropriate. So I just wanted to sort of register that voice, that point of view.
Okay, I mean you're reading it within the Chumash, and I'm suggesting that there might be two ways to read the book.
Oh, I understand. I heard that other way, but I think ultimately, given the distance, somewhere, not only in Chumash, but like I said, the long arc of there are many things in the Torah that foreshadow later stories that take place in the Nevi'im, and I think this one foreshadows the greater distance that would occur later.
Great.
So I think there's a strong point, not just in Rashi's way of looking at it,
Okay.
but the point in general.
I think, Raphael, that what you kind of emphasize is this healthy discussion about the different ways that we can look at these tribes. But I think ultimately, and the unintended consequences in later history. But I think ultimately, like any situation like this, the real issue to me, the real excitement to me is that from day one, this promised land was a compromised land, meaning to say that these two and a half tribes came. Even before they got into the brand new car, they already had issues, and we're talking about, can they add a trailer? Can they sit in the back seat? It was spanking new, and already we look at Israel today with all of the different factions and all of the different opinions about who owns what land and how we should cut our borders. And to me, the biggest takeaway is there is one discussion that relates to their intention and where they fall within the commentaries and within history. But there's the other issue, and I want to bring it into the not so distant present already, that even from the get-go, there were discussions about where the borders were, whether you were in or whether you were out, whether you were a purist or were detracting from the movement. And that is pretty amazing that already from that time, this occurred. If I wanted to take it up into the present, in modern Zionist history, there was a big discussion between Weizmann and Ben Gurion on the one hand, and Jabotinsky on the other, about what the boundaries of the future state of Israel should be. And Weizmann and Ben Gurion were willing to compromise, and Jabotinsky did not. And the main issue was whether the borders would be on both sides of the Jordan or the Jordan would actually be the border. So it's fascinating that the story that we have in front of us is actually a prequel to an argument that related to the founding of the State of Israel. Jabotinsky wrote a song that became actually the anthem of Cherut and the rejectionists who felt that Ben Gurion should not make the compromise. And he has verses in it. The chorale is, two banks has the Jordan, this is ours, and that is as well. It's stretching from the sea to the desert, and the Jordan in the middle. Two banks has the Jordan, this is ours, and that is as well. And it's fascinating that this concept of enlarging the borders so that what happened in the Parshat that we're reading, where the Reubenites and the Gadites went ahead and said they wanted to live outside of the borders, that actually changed the facts on the ground, and it became a new border. And it just seems to me that it's so fascinating when we talk about what the borders of the land should be and how we should even look at these borders, that we can't but help go back to that first moment when the Jews hadn't even passed over the river, and already they were having these kinds of discussions, and I should say compromises. So I wonder what everyone's thoughts are in terms of it almost becomes, it's a land of compromise, and it's a land where different people have different visions from the get-go.
I kind of envision that the promised land, and when the Israelites crossed over, and that was like up an oasis that would flood the whole planet with the milk and honey, with this divine consciousness, and a mistaken, of course, human frailties of thinking started to think about borders, and it was really just a key and a lock, and in came the Israelites, and the alchemy was ready to flood the whole planet with divine consciousness. And so I just wanted to add that feeling that I have, that we really could just forget about all the human limitations of borders and strife and see it as an oasis that was unlocked to release that to the world, but humans got in the way.
That's a nice idea. And Michael, finish up your thought. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I think it's a good thing that it isn't about borders, and it's really about going back to the moment and put the key in the lock and let this be the work to make one holy planet. And start, of course, you have to start with a seed. And why run after the leaves when you can go back to the seed and then grow a tree of life on the whole planet that goes everywhere and brings everyone together, and no borders, and global citizenship and consciousness. So that's
fantastic. I love that idea.
But I want to take maybe a little bit of what Michael was saying in a slightly different direction. And that is, yes, I think that Jerusalem and the Promised Land have always been both a reality and a metaphor. And there is absolutely no question, especially in their later history, where the two could live simultaneously. But unfortunately for people living on a particular piece of land, the metaphor doesn't help. And that ultimately is what borders and conquering and troop movements and relocation of citizens always ends up. So I would like to talk about an amazing situation that is happening as we speak in Israel. And the New York Times had an article on July 4th, and it talked about how the secular peace effort has pretty much died, and that this might be a moment in time for people who are knowledgeable and committed to religion to actually start talking about the issues that are dividing the Palestinians and the Israelis. And the example that they give, and the reason why it's happening right now, is there, as you may all know, there is a new party that is a part of the Knesset and part of the coalition, the ruling coalition. It's headed by Mansour Abbas, and it's called Ram. And unlike what one would think that would be a secular party, it actually is a Muslim Brotherhood type of party. It's absolutely committed to Islam. It's one of those instances where exactly the type of person that you think could not reach out and compromise is seeing the ability to make the likelihood of his people better. And the Times gave a history of this person who had a teacher named Sheikh Abdul Nimir Dawash, who was put in jail, in Israeli jail, because he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. And when he came out, he did a turnabout and said that actually the Muslims living in Israel should try to obey the laws. And he met up with a Rabbi Michael Melchior, and the two of them, he since has passed away, but Rabbi Melchior has continued, and clearly his student, who is the head of the Ram party, has continued, seeing the future, seeing the potential of religious people who can read a text like we're reading today and can discuss the issues from the perspective of religious categories of thought, that they in fact are the ones who are most equipped to look for ways out. I mean, even if it's the most basic thing, that the concept of a state does not exist either in Islam or in biblical or Talmudic Judaism. The idea that you can make covenants, and those covenants can be permanent, they can be temporary. The fact that you can live on a land, but every 70 years the land reverts back to somebody else and looks at land ownership totally different. All of these categories are religious categories that we study week in and week out. And sometimes we look at ourselves and saying, why are we studying these texts that have no relationship with human affairs and politics and people's lives? And the truth is, it might actually be the opposite. And I'm just intrigued by this movement of religious scholars being able to sit down and to figure out ways that we can communicate, because clearly religious scholars have more in common than they have apart. And I'd like to open that up for a short discussion and comment, or just leave you with that thought.
That's a great thought. I think, Geoffrey, if we leave it at that, I think we've done an amazing job. And it's amazing that we took it back from Reuben and Gad, and we took it to modern politics and, you know, some of the real achievements in the state of Israel. That's really a nice idea, a good way to end this conversation about this parsha.
Fantastic. Well, Shabbat Shalom, and
Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Enjoy that. The Shabbat, enjoy the parsha, the double parsha. I look forward to next week with everybody.
Absolutely. Shabbat Shalom.